Hey guys, welcome back to the First Methodist Shreveport podcast. I'm here with Jessica Miller and Sophia Sanders of the Gingerbread House. How are y'all doing?
Thank you for
Hi.
having us. So good.
Yeah, glad y'all are here. Heard a lot about the Gingerbread House, so I'm very excited to talk about everything. So, how did the Gingerbread House get started, or what is it?
So we've been serving the Northwest Louisiana community for going on 25 years now. We
Okay.
just celebrated this past June with a big celebration. That was really exciting. But the Gingerbread House was formed so that kids who have been victims of sexual abuse, physical abuse, and other types of abuse would have somewhere to go to be interviewed so that they wouldn't have to go through many interviews like it used to happen. And so the Gingerbread House started in June of 1998. And then since then we have grown and we now have 7 completely different programs, but that all work together to help the same victims.
Oh, wow. And so, what was the program like before the Gingerbread House came into being? Like, what would people have to go through who went through that
So
situation?
it was not a good climate.
Yeah.
Kids as young as 2, 3 years old, so long as they could talk and could be interviewed, were made to talk to anywhere between 8 to 11 different adults before any, help took place for them. And so if you have little kids, or if you can imagine, even as an adult, having to tell your story over and over again to different strangers in completely different locations, it changes. And it doesn't change because you're making it up or lying about it. It changes just because of that's how we recall memory. And so, kids, when they were having to tell so many strangers, what the number one thing that was happening out of that is that they became known as interview fatigued and they didn't want to tell anybody. And so by the time that they were actually disclosing abuse details to someone who could do something about it, they didn't want to talk about it. Or their stories would sound rehearsed or inconsistent. And so less than 5% of cases were being successfully prosecuted back in 1997, 98.
Goodness.
And so enter the Gingerbread House and our multidisciplinary team, because we're not a standalone. We work with 25 local agencies that make up our multidisciplinary team. And so as a result of that, and of course we'll talk more in detail, but we have been able to lower the number of interviews for a child to 1 in most instances. And our prosecution rates have gone to over 97% successful prosecution of
Wow.
cases. So it's a huge jump from less than 5 to over 97. And the number one reason for that is that collaboration piece through the forensic interview.
That is incredible. I cannot imagine, like you said, even as an adult, having to go through a traumatic experience like that and then having to tell your story over and over and over. So that is such an amazing gift to give those people, especially in a situation that they're in. So how did everything get started?
So Sophia was actually one of our volunteers in the early days. So I'm going to let her talk a little bit about what her experience was, maybe, a different perspective in the early days.
In the early days, it was a little house on Jordan Street, and we had a forensic interviewer, counselor. It was a small staff, and it was a very small building, and we have grown tremendously. And so now our staff is 13 strong. At the Gingerbread House, we have 2 counselors, we have 4 forensic interviewers, we have family advocates that help with the non-offending caregivers' needs. So it's just grown so that we can meet those families' needs where they are at that moment.
And
And a therapy dog.
Yes, and we have a therapy dog. We
Really?
did not have that when I was volunteering in high school. So Rambo is our therapy dog, and he helps out with counseling and when the counseling kids are coming, so that they can feel comfortable. And so a lot of times they'll just sit on the floor and talk with our counselors while petting the dog. A lot of times we have a hard time separating kiddos from their caregivers, from the waiting room to the forensic interview room. So that dog really helps so much to put them at ease and calm. And so it makes them feel secure, and it's just something fun. I mean, who doesn't love a sweet dog? And he is a sweetheart.
He's a sweetheart.
That's awesome.
I think he's more our therapy dog some days.
Yeah. When we've
staff.
had like a rough day,
Yeah.
I'm like, "Where's Rambo?" And our detectives who stop by, they know exactly where the treat jar is for him. And so, I mean, I think he's gained a few pounds.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Since working at Gingerbread House.
He's chubby.
That is too funny. And so, like, whenever everything was getting started, like, were there growing, or like, what was the passion behind starting the Gingerbread House?
So, ultimately it came down to a group of concerned citizens,
Yeah.
like how any good project around our community starts. And so, it was a mixed group from those that worked in prosecution of cases to child protection workers, law enforcement, and so forth. But what they looked at the most was, how can we improve this? We know that we have a problem. And, when we talk about less than 5% to over 97%, there were 1,385 cases between 1997 to 98 in just Bossier and Caddo. And out of that number, less than 5% were being successfully prosecuted. Those are pretty huge stats.
Yeah.
And so, we look at the bigger scope of the problem, but every single one of those numbers represents an individual, a child who had something horrific happen to them. And so we knew as a community we had to do better. There had to be a better way. And so right around that same time in the middle 80s or so, the Child Advocacy Center movement was getting started. It started out of Huntsville, Alabama,
Yeah.
by Representative Bud Kramer at the time. And he was deeply vested in figuring out a better way to serve these kids and families. And so our team here at our kind of like our initial task force that they came up with the name Gingerbread House. They weren't called that initially. They traveled. They went to Huntsville. They went to Dallas. They visited Jefferson Parish down South Louisiana, where the first center was in our state. And they loved what they saw, and it was working. People were coming together. And so they said, let's try it here. Why not? And so, you can imagine the early years, as we would like to call them, there was a lot of hesitation, I think, from all the team partners. So they, an investigator would say, why do I want to add one more person that can possibly mess up my case, my investigation? Child protection workers, we know what we're doing here. Why do we have to now go to another place? And so slowly, we started building those bridges and really showing that this worked. This one central agency that is child friendly, that is designed to work and meet the kids' needs exactly where they're at, and where we can have the forensic interview take place by a neutral party. And that's our forensic interviewers. It allows the detectives and the child protection workers to sit back and actually watch and observe the interview live as it's taking place through closed circuit television, and they wear an earpiece so they can communicate with the interviewer. And I think that very slowly they realized, they're able to get more information out of a young child and even teenagers than we are able to get in an hour, And very slowly that rapport started building within our team. And then from there, it just exploded. We signed a protocol. And so to this day, we operate, it gets reviewed every 3 years, but to this day, we operate under those terms, and we're nationally accredited by National Children's Alliance. So kind of adds a level of our reputation, speaks for itself. And so at the Gingerbread House, our team of 13 professionals, everything we do is based on teamwork. There is no I in what we do. We are here to meet their needs, and every child is different. Every case has unique situations surrounding it. So I think for us, let Sophia kind of chime in, but I think for us, being able to see a child who maybe is very hesitant initially and maybe kind of scared and in a hard place, to see them go through the process and go through our counseling program, and months down the road to see them come back and just being back to being a kid and laughing and not being so afraid and knowing our names, going to pet Rambo, our therapy dog. We love being able to see kids go back to being kids and not have to carry that burden, in their heart for, without somebody to support them.
Yeah, I definitely think it was not planned that way, the way our building is laid out, but our counseling is towards the back of the building. And so the kids have to walk past all the forensic interviewers, family advocates, they have to walk through everyone. And so they get to see everyone, say hi. And it's like, that's why we do our job. When we get to see their smiling faces and get to see the positivity that is going on in their lives, that makes it worthwhile, because I think we hear and see so much negativity and just trauma that these children have to go through, that it's hard. And so people ask me, how do you sleep at night after hearing these, children's stories about, what has happened to them? And it's terrible and it's horrible. But like Jessica said, just to see them and the positivity, and when we partner with our multidisciplinary team and work with the DA's office and get to see these children have successes in the judicial system, it's amazing.
Yeah. Because I'm sure that's like an incredible thing for y'all to see on the back end. Like, I'm sure someone who is here now or maybe going through this sees their conviction as almost like, yeah, granted, like this should happen. But for y'all looking backwards, you know that this wasn't always the case. Right. And so
there's a lot of hard work that the investigators, medical team, prosecutors, the forensic interviewers, there's a lot of hard work that starts from the very beginning, from the moment a child makes that initial disclosure to a trusted adult and the police report is initiated and everything. And so there's a lot of things that happen, and I think a lot of people think it happens in 24 hours and it's done, and we've got the case, we've got them arrested, we've got them put away in jail, and this will never happen again. But the reality is that it takes a while. We have to get all the evidence. We have to make sure that we're getting the right person, that, we have the evidence to hold them, because we don't want to arrest without evidence.
Yeah.
And so, that's a key part of the forensic interview, getting their statement, because that can be key in making an arrest. And so there's a whole lot that goes on with our team, and there's a lot of different pieces. So it definitely takes more than 24 hours, unlike the TV show.
That would be wonderful if we could.
It would be great if it
24,
did, but it definitely takes a while. But it's great to have a team that works together, has great communication, so that we can do these as quickly as possible to ensure the integrity of the case.
Yeah, I guess that in the beginning that was probably some of what people were thinking with the 8 or so interviews, that you wanted to get as many details as possible. You wanted to make sure the person was actually convicted. And so how do y'all condense all of that into just one? When you said there's like one time that they have to give their testimony.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, an investigator from the law enforcement side, they're going after the bad guys, right? That's their focus. The Department of Children and Family Services, their focus is the safety and well-being of that child in the family, and whether there's any culpability on behalf of the caregivers. So those are vastly different focus areas. Yeah. Then you've got the child and you've got the family. And so, each of these instances of abuse is so unique. The perpetrator might be someone in the family. It could be mom's boyfriend or the biological father. It could be somebody else. But when that happens, if that individual is being removed from the family, that creates its own, its own trauma within that family unit. And so there's many layers to the dynamic of abuse. And so it's very important for us to have that unity, to bring the team together so that, at the core, at the center of everything we do is that child, and is ensuring that above and beyond we don't cause further trauma. So everything we do is centered on being, knowledgeable of child dynamics and development. One of the really neat things that I have absolutely loved of my time there, I've been there for 20 years of the 25, so a really long time. I've gotten to see the evolution of the Gingerbread House. But one of the neatest things that I think that we added was our Child Life program. And so we added that in 2015. And so Sophia is actually a certified child life specialist, and I hired her for that role. So I'm going to let her tell you kind of what's unique about that. But I think that was, in the early years, the missing piece that we were missing. And so you remember the interviews before and after. So do you want to talk a little bit about how that complemented everything?
Yeah. So prior to having Child Life at the Gingerbread House, the child would be taken from the waiting room and gone directly into the forensic interview, not knowing where they're going, who they're getting to talk to. Sometimes they don't even know why they're there, because they didn't make a disclosure.
And was this at the Gingerbread House or at the police station?
At the police station or at the Gingerbread House, at the previous, when we did not have Child Life.
Okay.
And so the kiddos didn't really understand what was going on. They had a lot of questions about who am I going to get to talk to, and it's a lot of with the little kids' fantasy thinking like, what's going to happen to me? Where's mom going to be while I'm doing this? And so after we started the Child Life program. So Child Life specialists have a background in child development and working with children who are undergoing a lot of stress and anxiety. And you see them primarily in hospital settings working with children who are getting a new diagnosis or a treatment, surgery, anything like that that could be traumatic for them or cause them great anxiety. And so we adapted that same concept for a children's advocacy center because these kiddos are going through something very it's high anxiety. You don't know what's going to happen next. A lot of control has been taken away from this child, and so we want to give that control back to them. So what that looks like is that we are talking to the kiddos beforehand, showing them a picture book of the forensic interviewer that they're going to get to speak to, answering any questions that they have prior to. We don't get into disclosure, but we just kind of let them know this is the room where we're going to get to go. These are the things that we can bring into the room to make you feel comfortable. What kind of questions? I've had kiddos ask me, one of them asked me, well, is it going to hurt when they pull my tooth? And I was like, no, we're not pulling any tooth. But, they had a toothache. And so they really thought that while they were here, something like that, I'm going to speak to the judge today.
Where am I going to sleep tonight?
Exactly, because we're the Gingerbread House, so where am I going to sleep tonight? So there are different things like that they have these questions. When am I going to get to see my mom next? These are all questions that we can answer to them so that when they walk into that forensic interview room, they have a sense of control with the situation. They get to pick out the seat where they're going to get to sit because we have multiple areas where they can sit, and it's really a nice, calm, and child-friendly environment. So they can do all of those things, and they feel confident, and that helps them feel more secure with giving their statement to the forensic interviewer. And so prior to, and I've seen forensic interviews that have been done without Child Life and with Child Life, and it's just a sense of the child knows what's happening, and it makes it just easier, and they feel more comfortable. Again, putting the child first.
And back in control. Little things like in the early days when we were researching the best practice, standards, if you will, for little kids, especially like under the age of 6, being able to have their feet on the ground when they're talking about a difficult event that's happened to them gives them a sense of control. So we added little bitty chairs, where they can feel like they're the boss of that situation. And they are. Nobody knows better what happened other than that child. And so our forensic interviewers meet them where they're at. And so it's always one forensic interviewer and the child. So it makes it less intimidating. They're not seeing, police officers in uniform. They're not seeing 4 or 5 adults. They're meeting with one individual. And then in the adjacent room is where the team would be observing that interview live. And so, the best way that I ever heard it from our detectives, they're trained when they go through the academy, they're trained on how to deal with bad guys, arrests. And so they're used to interrogations. We don't interrogate kids. We interview children. And so we facilitate the environment and the opportunity for them to tell us in their own words, if they're ready to talk about what's happened to them. And so that's audio and video recorded. And so all of that leaves with law enforcement. It becomes the evidence as the child's taped statement, and it can be used in court to prosecute the case. Now, just because a forensic interview exists does not mean the child will not have to take the stand. That's a huge misconception. If the child is deemed, old enough to take the stand, that is a judge that will make that determination whether they want them there or not. And at that point, the way that our judicial system is set up is not set up to protect kids, it's set up for adults. And so that child, if they're the witness to that case, they are, and the defense wants them to testify, they can be made to testify in that court. And so I don't know about you, but if you're a law-abiding citizen, anything dealing with law enforcement or the courts, it kind of puts you on edge, right? You feel nervous, even if you're completely innocent. You just kind of feel like you're out of sorts. And so, it's intimidating to see the whole process. Imagine being a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old and having to go through that. So that forensic interview really alleviates a lot of those problems. And so the way that everybody's always curious, how does it play in
Yeah.
Well, once that forensic interview is recorded, we have to adhere to a bunch of different requirements that are set, by the laws in
Yeah.
the state of Louisiana and federal laws. And so our forensic interviewers are trained. We can't just have somebody off the street, to hire them and say, okay, today you're the interviewer. They go through extensive training.
Yeah.
And so they know how to ask the questions in a way that's not leading and that's child friendly. So you might have a detective who's new on the job who says, I need to find out more about what that getaway vehicle looked like at 0800 hours when the crime occurred, and you've got a 4-year-old in the room. And so our forensic interviewers have to kind of translate that into terms that the child can understand, and say, when you said that you left your house, did you leave in a car or a truck or something else? We always leave it open-ended because kids, they aim to please. And even if you give them, if you only give them 2 choices, they're going to pick one, even if it's not reality.
Yeah.
So leaving it open allows that control that Sophia was talking about for that child. And once that interview has taken place, that tape can be introduced in the judicial system. And so the prosecution, which would be the state, would say, and now in lieu of, Johnny's testimony, I would like to introduce tape ABC 1, 2, 3, whatever the coded item. And so they would introduce that tape, and then they might ask the child, was that you on the tape? Yes, it is. Did you tell the truth? Yes, I did. No further questions. And then they may not have to go through all the details again. Now, our forensic interviewers will. They will testify on behalf of the child victims in the cases. And so the defense would then have the chance to cross-examine that child. But if you can think of a 6 or 7-year-old describing things that no child should have any knowledge of, it's very difficult to discredit that child. And so those interviews, when we have the opportunity to talk to the jury after trials, they always say that forensic interview is like the piece of evidence that really, in their mind, helped them to realize that indeed this abuse had taken place and that there's no way this kiddo could have been making that up. And so that process it's lengthy. That takes, the interview itself might be an hour, maybe less depending on the age of the child. But that process from the interview to gathering the evidence to having it sent for review to the case going to trial, you're looking at maybe sometimes 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, 2 to 3 years. And I think another
Goodness.
thing that's pretty powerful about the forensic interview is that you get to see the child, because we do those forensic interviews pretty quickly after. And depending on the severity of the case or the situation, we might do it within 24 hours. So if the child has any marks or bruises or any, you get to see that on the forensic interview. And if you see the behaviors of the children, how they act, they might be timid or fearful. You might see tears when they're talking about something, the emotions, the real emotions that are coming through.
Yeah.
Because like Jessica said, we're talking 2 to 3 years later. Now, if you had a 6-year-old and now you're looking at a 7, 8-year-old,
Or 9.
or 9-year-old now, and hopefully this child has also gone through counseling and in a safe place, in a safe home with safe caregivers who are taking great care of them, you're going to see a totally different child than you did in that forensic interview. So if you put that child in front of the jury, 3 years later, they're not going to get to see that raw emotion, that physical evidence that they get to see on that child compared to on the forensic interview. So I think that also, not just the child's words, but getting to see them, it's pretty powerful. And like Jessica said, you really can't deny that, when you see that, that it makes a difference in these cases.
Yeah. And it sounds like accuracy is the main thing that y'all are going for, and that provides the
Absolutely.
most pinpointed prosecution evidence possible without having to, like you said, elaborate or.
We also don't
lead
want to
someone.
re-victimize the child. We don't want to put them through that trauma multiple times, rediscussing it and re-triggering them or anything like that. We want them to go through that process one time. And I also do forensic interviews, and I've had a good number of forensic interviews, especially with teenagers, when they're very hesitant to disclose, that very hesitant to talk to me. And, one of the things they come is, I don't want to talk about it. And when you let them know, we just have to talk about this one time, and then that's it. You don't need to discuss this after. They're so much more willing to have that conversation with you and give their statement because they really feel like, okay, I'm going to get this all out. And we had one of the kiddos one time, little ones, write on one of the dry erase boards, Gingerbread House. They helped me spit the bad stuff out.
Spit the stuff out.
Spit the stuff out. And, you know,
that I had been holding in. Yeah.
And so we really want them to be able to just spit it out and get it out and then move on from there and go through that healing phase, which is next.
That is incredible. And so many times that y'all were talking about the process of the Gingerbread House, I couldn't help but think this is probably how it should be for adults as well. Because
it probably wouldn't be a bad idea.
It would not be a bad idea.
I think,
we would need a much bigger place and
more
a much
people,
larger staff.
Much larger staff, more funding, the whole thing. But it wouldn't be ideal if, you know, all victims were treated this way. But we definitely want to make sure that the children who come to the Gingerbread House feel believed, feel heard, feel respected, not judged, all of these things. And also making sure that the families, the non-offending caregivers, because this abuse doesn't just happen to the child, it happens to the entire family. The whole it could change a whole dynamic of a family, a household,
in
depending
an instant.
on who
really
the alleged suspect is. You know, it could have been the breadwinner of the family. It could have been, you know, mom and dad, and now grandparents who thought they were done raising kids now are caregivers of this small child, and they're retired, you know, all these things. So we try to support them, and that we do a lot with our family advocacy program to help with that as well.
Yeah. Which is great that y'all do that, because in so many circumstances, like y'all said, if it's the breadwinner or someone who's like a centerpiece for the family, there might be hesitancy within the family to even go forward with it. Like, because there are plenty of circumstances where people don't want to rock the boat too much, and
we
it's
hear
easier
that
to
often.
shine. Yeah.
We always hear people say, I don't want to accuse somebody wrongly. Of course we don't. But for kids, you know, I think the important thing is to remember that kids rarely lie about instances of abuse. And so if there's a child who's making something up, we still need to explore why that's happening. Is it a, you know, are they being coached to do so? Is it a custody case? Are there other dynamics in the family where that child feels unsafe and feels the need to make that up? Because in our, you know, in our professional view, it is very rare when kids make up allegations of abuse. But the neat thing about the Gingerbread House, we are a neutral fact-finding party to that investigation. And so we're not law enforcement, we're not child protection. And so there's many instances when that forensic interview actually clears somebody's name, you know, and allows us to know that it was a misinterpretation. Maybe the child said something and a school counselor interpreted it as something else, and, you know, down the road. But it's important. What I tell everybody, you know, preventing child abuse is an adult's responsibility. It is not a child's responsibility. Those shoulders were not made to bear that burden. A little kid should never have to bear that burden. However, we cannot leave them out, just like we wouldn't leave a child and let them cross the street without an adult when they're little. And so we have a huge program in the community called Knowledge is Power, where we do the prevention work as well. So from the early days and kind of seeing the numbers go up, we serve over 900 victims a year. In our community, we decided, let's look at the other side as well, and let's hopefully try to reach kids before anything's happened to them or where it hasn't progressed.
900 a year.
900 a year.
In Northwest Louisiana or just Shreveport?
Just Northwest Louisiana. We serve 9 parishes. However, the bulk of our cases are still Caddo and Bossier. Over, I'd say, about 75 to 80% of that 900 is Caddo Bossier.
Wow.
But we have the highest stat in the state. We serve the most number of victims. In the last 12 months, we served 920. That comes out to 77 newly identified child victims every single month. Think of that for a second. 77, just right here in our little corner of the state. We have even higher numbers in New Orleans and Baton Rouge. Not because it happens more here, but because our team does such a great job of bringing these kids and getting them help through the forensic interview and through the Gingerbread House. But the prevention side, you know, it's equally as important, if not more. And so in that program, we serve over 50,000 children and adults every single year. in Caddo, Bossier, Webster, and DeSoto parishes. And so we go out to schools and we have presentations that are age appropriate.
Yeah.
We teach the teachers what to look for. We teach church members what to look for. Any audience of any size can request a free presentation from the Gingerbread House, and we're happy to come out. And our goal with that, again, is to empower kids to know what to do if someone tries to, touch them in a way that makes them feel uncomfortable. And then with our teenagers, we also talk a lot about internet safety and, things that the dangers of being online and how to make good choices. I think that's a huge piece that we can all probably work on, but especially our young people. We feel it's really important to work with our middle and high schoolers, especially high schoolers, to know that the choices and the things that they do now do have the ability to impact their life, moving forward.
Social media.
And so it's a great passion of ours to make sure that we're both working, on the side of the victims and walking alongside them, and then very proactively on the prevention side as well. So that's another one of our programs. We have many.
And I love you said you take the prevention aspect to churches and schools, because a lot of times we want to compartmentalize this act to something that is going to be outside of church, outside of school. Like, this is something that happens in places that aren't safe, but I'm sure you all know that it happens in
everywhere.
Yeah.
Some people think it doesn't happen to them. It would never happen in my neighborhood. Would never happen in my school.
Yeah. Or your family.
Or my family would never happen. But the reality is that there's a high chance that it does, that somebody. A lot of people tell me, I never knew the Gingerbread House existed until I needed their services. And that's the truth, because people don't talk about it. And people don't discuss child abuse, or, I know that when I was in school, nobody talked to me about body safety. It wasn't discussed in schools, and nobody talked to me about it. And so now I find it so important that we discuss it with children and don't overlook, because it could be the, you could reach one child who's in need and has that, and they can hear your message about prevention education, and it can make a difference, and they can turn around and go to their safe person and say, this is happening to me, and it shouldn't be. I didn't know it wasn't supposed to be happening to me.
Yeah.
So we always tell kids to find their safe person, find their 5 people, and if the first person doesn't hear them or listen to them, tell the next person, and keep telling until somebody listens to you.
And teachers are so important too, as educators in general, because they're like that first line of defense in many cases. They know the kids, they're in their care daily. They know when something's out of sorts for that particular child. They know patterns of behavior. They have them for a long time during the day, and kids feel safe for the most part with their teachers and in their learning environment. So we like to equip them with the knowledge to know how to respond, because that initial response to a child could be the difference between that child continuing to disclose or that child shutting down and never saying another word. And so it's crucial that they know how to react, and how to make that mandated reporter, how to make that report, who to call, what that process looks like. So we love working with them. They're a great audience, and they're so powerful. It's a great partnership that we have with the schools and in our community.
That's great that y'all teach them that they need to tell somebody, because like you said, kids don't know. One wouldn't be able to make up the stories that they do because they've never experienced. They shouldn't have experienced those things, and so if that situation is happening to the point where someone has told the child or convinced them that it's normal, like that y'all have stepped in and said, like, this isn't normal, because there's no blame that you can put. Like you said, you can't blame the child for the situation. You can't say that the child should have known better, because they didn't know better. And likely, if they're being abused, the abuser isn't going to tell them, this isn't right, what I'm doing isn't right.
And there's so many secrets, with abuse. There's so many threats and such a psychological manipulation of that child. It happens in secrecy, right?
Yes.
This is not out in the open. They have, they're just threatened with so many different things, from harm to their family, to their dog, to when they're a little bit older, you asked for this through your behavior or what you were wearing. I'm
tell
gonna
your
blast
friends.
this on social media. You'll never be the same again. To you're gonna tear your family apart. And how could you do this to your family, to your mom, or whoever that
Yes.
might be. So it's hugely important for us to make sure that our program is a body empowerment program and body safety. This is not your old fashioned sex ed, or whatever, the people that makes their hair stand up in the back of their neck. It is not that. It is, we talk about the private parts of the body as those that are covered by a swimsuit, and so that's an easy visual for younger
Yeah.
kids. And so we talk that nobody should mess with those parts of your body, and if they do, here's what you do, and this is how you tell. And if the first person that you tell doesn't believe you, you keep telling until someone does. And it's sad that we have to teach that piece, but it's very important. Think of a young kid and they tell somebody in their family, but maybe the family doesn't do anything about it, or maybe the perpetrator is in that family unit. So we want them to keep telling and tell it somebody. We talk about the safety network. We use our handprint. And we talk about people in the family and people outside of the family, so that they have, a plethora of people that they can reach out to. And I'll never forget, I was doing a presentation years and years ago, and I had third graders, and we had just shown one of our videos that talked about abuse from a child's perspective, and different types of abuse, like physical abuse, neglect, not having enough food, all of that. And so this little girl, you could just tell that she was, something was impacting her from what she was watching. It was bothering her. And so afterwards, we had her stay with the school counselor present, and myself and another staff member. And we said, was there something that bothered you, about what you saw? And she nodded her head. She wouldn't even speak. And so we said, would you like to talk about it? And she said yes. And, long story shorter, she said, I never knew that other people's daddies didn't do that to them. And so she was 8. She had been abused since she was 3. So that was her reality for 5 years. Why would she know that it's any different? If something starts in your life when you're 3 years old, that's your norm. That's what you think happens in everybody's family unit. And so her father was actually picking her up from school that day. So we had to intervene immediately and, call the Department of Children and Family Services. The school responded very well and very appropriately. And so for that day, that abuse stopped for that girl. We were able to intervene. Imagine if she had just not said anything, or if we had not given that presentation, maybe she would have eventually told. But what if she would have had to go through it for another 6 months, even 2 weeks, even one day of enduring that abuse. And so I think it's really important for everybody in the community to take a very active role. And, we like to tell people, your role, if you're not a parent or, someone that's around kids, your role is still, if a child discloses, to believe that child and make the report to the proper authorities. Let the authorities investigate. We're not asking for anybody to become an investigator. That's not our role, right? As citizens, that's just not our role. Let the professionals handle that piece, but believe that child and make that report so that it can at least be looked into. And you could be the difference between that child having that abuse stop or having it continue indefinitely.
Yeah. 'Cause that's
It's
right.
huge. It's a big responsibility for all of us. So
It is. Because you're, 100% right that if the child tells you, there's no way they should know what that stuff is. And if they do, that's a whole other situation.
Exactly.
So going back to one thing that y'all said, whenever there is an abuser who threatens the victim with some sort of disclosure, like, I'm going to tell all your friends, I'm going to put this on social media, are there ways y'all teach people to combat that? Or like how, because I've got 2 daughters growing up, or one's a 2-year-old, one just turned a month old. And so
we'll give you some grace for the sleep deprivation.
Unfortunately, like these thoughts do come to my head because, I've known the stats about Shreveport that sex crimes is a very high percentage in Shreveport. And so it's good to know there are people out there looking out for our kids, but also at the same time, if our kids are in this situation, how do they go about how do I go about that situation with an abuser who is threatening like their livelihood as a teenager, because your social media or like your social standing is like the currency of being a teenager.
It's everything, right?
Yeah.
That's number one.
What your peers think about you is so much more important than what your parents think about you or your grades or anything. I I remember that, I didn't care. And now, I call my mom every day to ask her all these questions. But I think, another great part of our prevention education program is that we do talk about cyberbullying, and we talk about what to do if you suspect it, or if if a friend's being threatened online, or what you should do, and about reporting it. And because it is something that we do see, cyberbullying, and with exchanging of inappropriate pictures online and things like that, texting inappropriate pictures, and then that can be used as blackmail. And so it's definitely teaching them ahead of time, so when they're, and I guess, was it 9 years old they get their first phone?
So it's very sad because by age 9, most children have access to a device. By age 12, they usually own their own device, or have been given their own device.
Yeah.
They're not paying for it, but they call it their phone, right?
Yeah.
And by age 11, most children have at least seen a nude photo online from someone that they know, and so. Reaching them in those middle school grades it's hugely important. And then, like Sophia was saying, we work with them on realizing that even those threats that a perpetrator, might have instilled or kind of communicated to them, that part's not going to stop. The only thing that will make the abuse stop is to report it and have it, stopped by the authorities.
Yeah.
We also have great connections for our adolescents who maybe are trafficked in many different ways, or if there's any pornography or nude images of a victim. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, is what it's kind of commonly referred to. They have great programs to try to identify those images as sensitive material and to work with victims to get them removed from the internet. And so that's a newer program, a couple of years old. And I think I have 2 teenagers, and I have a younger child, elementary. And so my oldest is a daughter and 16. And so all these thoughts, have gone through my head, and I often, when I'm evaluating a program or trying to think of where do we want to focus our energy, I like to look at it, if that were my family, how would I want them treated? Or how would I want my child to be helped by these individuals, and looking at it from that side. And so I know that, for teenagers, those threats it's like life or death for them. That's why we have such a high suicide rate in many ways amongst adolescents. And so we look at, how can we communicate to them the services that are available to help them, and the fact that by disclosing to somewhere like in the Gingerbread House, you're with safe people. We're not putting that, your forensic interview is not going to be uploaded for your friends to see. It's only going to be used in court, if the case gets to that level. And whatever that threat may be, it's not going to stop by you telling us. It's only going to intensify if you don't do anything about it. On the flip side of that, we like to educate our teenagers to make good choices. And that's a harder altogether. But things like, that they might, boyfriend-girlfriend type situations where they think, I'm sending just a cute, sexy photo or something to that. There's nothing sexy about it. You don't want to do it, number one. And number two, even receiving that image, is something that is a crime. And then sharing that image, moving it forward, even to showing it to your friends, all of those have implications. And not just on a moral level and not just on a legal level, but they have implications of how they affect your own life. We talk to some of our boys, high schoolers in particular. Can you imagine having your athletic scholarship revoked from the college of your choice because now you've been implicated in a case, and no university wants to deal with that? Do you know that universities nowadays have social committees of alumni that they just say, hey, we're considering this individual for admission. You're in their hometown. Can you do a little digging and tell me what their social media is like?
Oh,
that wasn't the case. I'm middle 40s. That wasn't the case when I went to college. I can tell you that. But it's something that when we try to put it in that perspective, we try to look at, is that what matters to you the most right now? Yeah, sports, my college career. Then let's make good choices so that you can see those dreams become a reality. Don't make a foolish choice that's going to, come back to hurt you. And so, they're smart. Adolescents are smart. Sometimes they're not given the credit that they deserve. And so we want to work alongside them and empower them to make better choices altogether, so that we can slowly, one by one, start building, ripples of change throughout our community. We love working with young people. A lot of people want to be like, middle school, high school, but we actually love working with them. So
2 questions. First one, so if there's a teenager who does send like an inappropriate photo that's underage, could that technically be prosecuted as like production of
Yes.
child pornography?
Yes, the law only looks at 2 years of difference between an offender and the victim. So if you have a 17-year-old with a 13-year-old or 14-year-old, allegations could be brought up against that 17-year-old.
Wow.
And those are eye-opening things, right? Especially when you think of high school classes and the way that they are now, where you can have electives and different things where you have mixed grades. You know, you could have a sophomore with a senior, freshman with a senior in the same class, and they could become friends and they want to hang out, but we need to look at that. And any time that a nude photo is distributed in any format, that is distributing of an inappropriate image, and it can be prosecuted. And so
And it doesn't matter the gender, like if it's a guy to a girl.
it does
or a
not
girl to
matter
a
the
guy.
gender, and
Okay.
receiving it and passing it on, that has its own set of charges. And so it's really important that as parents, you know, we communicate that information to our kids and empower them to make those good choices. And then for schools, that they take advantage of resources like the Gingerbread House and allow those presentations to come in. We went through a really rigorous process to be I guess like the stamp of approval for Caddo, Bossier, Webster, and DeSoto. And we have been in Caddo and Bossier since 2005, in Webster since 2008. And then in DeSoto, it's a little more recent, like 2019, 2020, right before COVID. And so they looked at every component of our program to make sure that it was appropriate and said, okay, yes, this is good material, good content. We just went through a copyright process, all of that. But now it's up to each individual school and the principal to say, I want you to come to my school and you know, and teach this material.
Yeah.
And so I can't tell you the number of times we have schools that say, well, that doesn't happen here. We don't have that problem here. Or we're in a rural area, you know, parts of the parish that are more rural, and we just have good old country kids. We don't have that stuff.
Big city
You know,
dangers,
that's
big city
Shreveport
crimes.
stuff.
Yeah.
We get that all the time, but
it
you know,
happens,
the
and-
reality is it's every neighborhood, every ethnicity, every socioeconomic level, and we can even pull from our database, which is 25 years old, and tell them specifically how many instances of abuse we've had from their school or from their zip code. Once we share that,
Makes a difference.
they're like, okay, well, when can you come?
Yeah, and I definitely, you know, when I go out and I talk to parents and they say, oh, I want my child to, I want y'all to come to my school, and I just remind them, tell your counselor, tell your principal that you want Gingerbread House, because we, you know, we want to be a part of their curriculum. And so, yeah, I always tell parents, you know, your voice is powerful, and it makes a difference with the school. And you can, you know, ask the school to, you know, consider allowing Gingerbread House Knowledge is Power into their school.
And it's not just public school. We do it for both public and private.
Okay.
And it's free of charge. That's even better.
All right. Yeah. That was my next question is how much would it cost? But okay,
no.
so that's great. Free
So
of charge.
so everything that we do at the Gingerbread House, the forensic interviews, the counseling, the prevention ed, everything that we do is free of charge, because we never want to turn away a child due to a family's inability to pay. So we don't look at insurance. We don't look at, you know, how much money that family makes. We want to support every child equally. And so everything is free.
Yeah. I love it. And so, as far as the prevention, would someone be able to come to the Gingerbread House if abuse hadn't happened yet, but there were I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like if someone was,
Like red flags?
yes, or if like the cyberbullying or like the images had been exchanged or like they were,
We can work
threatening.
on the prevention side with them. So sometimes
Okay.
we'll have mom groups or, you know, church groups, for example, who says, hey, our school's not doing this and we think it's important. Can you come talk to our kids? Absolutely. Now, if there's a suspicion of abuse of any sort, it has to be reported to law enforcement before that case can be brought to the Gingerbread House.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because once that forensic interview process is started, law enforcement collects that evidence. So once that interview is finished up, it's burned onto 2 DVDs, that evidence leaves with law enforcement. We do not retain that there at the Gingerbread House. And so they are the legal custodian of those records. So they have to be present for that. So now we take a lot of phone calls day in and day out of parents, you know, concerned and just want to talk through things, or even some school counselors will do the same. And we're always happy to help in that way and kind of walk them through it, even if they don't know if they should report or not, or where to, or, it can be difficult to figure that out. Abuse is reported in the parish or the location where it occurred. Even if you're going to a private school in Bossier, but the abuse happened in Shreveport, that report would be made for Shreveport. And so, nobody needs to remember all of that, right? They just need to remember that if you suspect abuse is taking place, you need to believe the child and report it to the authorities. And so they can call us and we can walk them through that process at any time.
I think it can be sometimes scary as an adult, I have the background from the Gingerbread House and the knowledge that I have, but, if I were just an adult, who didn't know any better, it could be, something about, well, I don't want to ruin that person's reputation by making this report. I don't know what to do. What are the next steps that I have to take? Because I do want to protect this child, but I also want to protect the integrity of possibly an innocent person. And I just have these gut feelings from these red flags that I've seen. And so just like Jessica said, reaching out and, one, getting the education from Gingerbread House for the mandated reporter, and two, reaching out to us and, talking it through, and we'd be happy to help.
So if you think that abuse is happening and you report, or they call the Gingerbread House, it's not going to lead to like an immediate investigation into someone that you suspect.
No, we will talk them through that process of how to report and kind of give them our very limited opinion at that point, because we don't have all the details, right? But we will say, yes, we think you need to report that and you should call, and kind of give them the specific number or, walk them through that. But once that report has been made, law enforcement is the agency that would bring or schedule that forensic interview. And then the family would come to the Gingerbread House, and that's where we do the forensic interview in that process. And so there is just that's a legal process and has to adhere to a lot of different, rules, of course. But, one of the things that, like we were talking with the little bit older kids, trafficking, trafficking is a big problem that we face. In the last 12 months, we had 106 victims of trafficking that we worked with. Out of the 920 children that we saw, 106 were victims of trafficking.
And what is trafficking?
So trafficking is any time that a child is used for sex or sexual activity in which there's something is exchange of value. And so that part kind of catches people, because the adult definition for trafficking requires that force, fraud, or coercion be a piece of it. But for children under the age of 18, you do not have to meet that parameter of force, fraud, or coercion. Only something of value has to be exchanged. And let me give you an example that we don't think about very frequently. If you're a runaway on the streets and someone offers you a Happy Meal in exchange for sexual activity, that is something of value because you're hungry and that's, something that you need. And so that is a trafficking instance. And so people often think it only involves money or someone getting put in a van and, moved across state lines or shipped overseas, kind of like how the movies like to depict. But what we see most often, we do see some instances like that, but what we see the most often are familial trafficking cases. And to me, it's probably the most heartbreaking thing that we see. And it just means that a member of the family is trafficking their own child for some type of gain. It could be, trafficking them, an uncle, an older cousin, a mother trafficking their own child, and they're still in the family. These are kids that are still made to go to school right here in our community. I will never forget, we had a little girl who was trafficked the last weekend of every month. And can you think of why that might be? Just the last weekend of every month.
Rent payment.
It was rent payment. Her mother needed to make rent. And so she trafficked her. She set up these, instances of abuse for this child to be assaulted by countless men to collect money so she could pay rent. And the way that she would do it, this was a second grader. The little girl, she would give her a 10-minute break in between these assaults on this child and give her a popsicle. And the weekend that she did not get the popsicles, is the next Monday is when the child told at school, because her mother didn't keep her end of the bargain, which was the popsicles, the break, the mental break for that child. And that was when she told. But, how horrific to have the number one person who, on this earth should have the heart to protect you against every crime, be the one individual who is actively participating and causing you this harm. And so, those instances of trafficking that we see that are familial trafficking, they're number one, they're very heartbreaking, and the dynamics of those cases are very difficult. And then number two, it's the number one reason why we're on call 24/7. And so our interviewers are on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have a rotation so that if there's an instance of abuse that requires that immediate forensic interview to take place, which our trafficking cases often do, that child can be brought immediately at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., whatever time it may need to be, and we can conduct that interview to make sure that they're safe for that day, and they don't have to go back to that environment. Or if there's we've talked about sexual abuse, physical abuse, trafficking, but the Gingerbread House also works with victims of any violent crime, homicides, witnesses of domestic violence, all of that, drug exchanges, where there was a child witness. All of those children are brought to the Gingerbread House and can be interviewed at the Gingerbread House because we have the training and the facility. And so anytime we have those types of cases, those are usually middle of the night, transactions that we need to interview immediately. And so we are here and, willing and able to do that for the community. But those cases, I will say, out of everything we see, seems to be like not that any abuse is better than the other, but they just seem to be the ones that kind of impact our team, I would say, probably the most.
They're
because
the
you see
harder
it, you see it immediately.
Yeah.
And the physical abuse cases as well, with the bruising.
That's hard. But it's so good that y'all are open, like you said, 24 hours a day, because I'm sure there are instances where people have almost talked themselves out of reporting something because maybe some place isn't open.
Right.
And, if you think being in that situation, the trauma you've just gone through, the more comfortable thing would be to let it go and to just not talk about it and just hope it never happens again.
I'll deal with it in the morning.
Yes, exactly. And then your day gets started and then you just never report it, and it's either allowed to continue or to someone else, or it happens to that person again. So.
And so the number to report, I feel like it's really important we communicate that to everybody, is 1-855-4, the number 4, LA Kids. So it's 1-855-4-LA Kids, Louisiana Kids. Okay. And that number is 24 hours a day. You can report at any point, and you can also report anonymously. And so if you're, feeling conflicted about giving your own information, you don't even have to do that. You can report anonymously and at least initiate that process.
Is that self-reporting, or can you report any suspected abuse?
Any suspected abuse.
Okay.
You can report any suspected abuse of a child.
Nice. Yeah. Good. And so are there any other programs that we need to know about that the Gingerbread House
Well, let's
does?
talk about some of the happy programs, right?
Okay, let's go.
Because abuse is such a heavy topic, right?
Yes.
We would all like for it to, like to joke and say, we'd love for the Gingerbread House to go out of business. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, it'd be wonderful.
Unfortunately, we don't see that happening anytime soon. But during Christmas coming up, we have a really fun program at the Gingerbread House. It's called Sponsor a Family for Christmas. And in a nutshell, what we do is we screen families all through the year that have needed our services. And if that family maybe is struggling a little bit more this year and needs that little extra help, we put them on our list. And it could be that we only had one child in the family who is the victim, but there's 4 other siblings in the family. And if that's the case, we will adopt all of them, the entire family. We don't leave anybody out. And so we have generous sponsors in the community who will say, I would like to sponsor 3 kids. I would like to sponsor 5 kids. So we match up our families with sponsors, and we have the kids write wish lists, and that goes to the sponsors so they can shop for the kids, bring the gifts to the Gingerbread House, we wrap them, and then we deliver them to the family so that they can, enjoy what Christmas is all about, sharing and caring for others. And so it's a really neat program where we love to have help from everybody out there. One of the neat things is that if you don't feel like you're in a position this year, perhaps, to adopt a whole family or even one whole kid, you can still donate a toy, new toys, unwrapped new toys, and we can put your donation with somebody else's donation and so forth, and then create that wish list. And so we get to play kind of like, we get to be Santa's elves and help out during that time. And we like to joke that it's the one time of the year where we get to see happy tears because the families are so moved, by that generosity. And so I know our partners here at First Methodist, we've had from local missions and, from the ministries, different groups, different Sunday school classes, have been so generous over the years to really step up and help out. And it just makes the world of difference to these kids and families. What better way to share the Christmas spirit and that, that giving from the heart than just to make a kid's Christmas a little bit more special. So we love that. It's a fun time.
Yeah.
And so December is a happy month for us at the Gingerbread House.
And then we definitely, because there are only 14 of us, we use volunteers to help wrap these gifts because we need a little extra hands wrapping gifts. And so
Rambo cannot wrap. He can do a lot of things. He cannot wrap.
He can supervise the wrappers. But we use our volunteers to help put these packages together and wrap them so that they are ready to go under the Christmas tree for these families.
Good. Oh, man. That's so great to hear. Glad that there is a positive.
Yes, you always have to look up, that's, I feel like no matter what we're handed out, what we like to tell the kids that walk through our doors is that no matter how horrific something may have been that they've had to endure, it doesn't have to define who they are, for the rest of their lives. Yes, it happened. And yes, it was unfortunate and nobody deserves that. You didn't do anything to deserve that. But there are people that care and we can walk alongside you and help you towards that path of healing. And you can still become and do anything that you want to in this world. This doesn't have to define your whole life or limit your ability to grow and to succeed. So we love to just push that out there. Kids need to hear that. All of us need to hear that. So.
And they can make a difference and they can
absolutely.
Oh, goodness. That's so good. So is there anything we've missed or anything y'all want to talk about that I haven't asked about?
I think we're good. The only thing that maybe we didn't talk about as much is that the Gingerbread House is a nonprofit organization.
Okay.
So in order for us to make all of our services available to the community, we have to raise funds from the public and private sector year in, year out, about a $1.2 million budget every year. And we depend heavily on our community to help us, to walk alongside us. And people say, oh, gosh, I can only give $10 or $20. It doesn't matter. The fact that you're given 10 and somebody else is giving 20, we put it all together and pretty soon we have a nice way to fund these programs for vulnerable victims. And so we've been very blessed that First Methodist, as I mentioned, has always walked alongside with us through the local missions team. And we've been so gracious to this church and this faith community for not only talking the talk, but also walking the walk. And so that's been hugely important to us and has made such a difference in the lives of so many kids. 15,595 kids since we opened our doors have walked through the Gingerbread House. So.
It's a great and somewhat sad number, but glad that y'all are doing it. And so volunteers, do y'all have any need or want for more volunteers in the Gingerbread House? Or is there anything that people can do if they want to volunteer their time?
Always. We love volunteers. We have, if you go to our website, gingerbreadhousecac.org, there's a volunteer column and it'll give you all the opportunities depending on whether you want to be involved in a short-term project or a long-term project or what type of volunteer, activity you're looking for. We also love to have kids that volunteer, about middle school and up. That's kind of what we look for. And so we can give service hours for Christmas. We need wrappers, like you mentioned. And so we're always looking for that help and that assistance because, again, it helps to keep our costs lower and then we can do more good with the funds that are entrusted to us.
Nice. And what do the kids do when they volunteer?
So we love having kids because what do they not do? You can ask them to help. They're always willing and they're always happy and they're fun. We love that. So they help us clean the toys in our waiting room. We clean those out weekly to keep them sanitized. They help put packets together of information. They have helped us count and sort T-shirts and materials and make photocopies. During Christmas, they help us organize our Santa's workshop, all of that. And so for that particular, I love having middle school and high schoolers. They're fun.
Yeah.
They come at it with a good heart and they're like, you want us to do that? Absolutely we can. You want us to lift that heavy box? Absolutely we can. So,
there's nothing better than being a middle school boy and someone asking you to pick up something heavy.
Yeah,
and you can do it.
It's bragging rights, right?
Yes.
We love it. So
Absolutely.
we love having our young people in our community volunteering.
Good. Well, I'm so glad y'all came in today. And
Thank you for having us.
And guys, we will talk to y'all next time.